This video is sponsored by Connell Guides. To get your hands on the most intelligent study guides on the market for GCSE and A-level English literature, as well as GCSE and A-level history, visit connellguides.com and use code RS15 at checkout for 15% off your order.
How is Mercutio presented in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet? Let's find out.
How is it going, Revision Squad? It's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and in this video we are going to have a think about how Mercutio is presented in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. As I'm sure you know by now, we are going to achieve that by doing several things. First of all, we are going to consider who Mercutio is as a character, what his story role is, and what he might be a symbol, representation, or metaphor for. After that, we're going to analyse a bunch of quotations that relates to Mercutio, discussing how Shakespeare's language choices and writerly techniques create certain impressions of this character. Finally, I will pose a big question for you to think about and, if you fancy it, answer in the comments section down below, which should help to develop your understanding of Mercutio further. My goal here is to help you out as you study or revise Shakespeare's play. If I am able to do that, please do let me know. You can give this video a like and write a comment on it. You could share it around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and you could subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, which YouTube tells me applies to more than 3/4 of you, which is absolutely bonkers. Anyway, now that I've gotten the video intro out of the way, just who is Mercutio? What is his story role, and what might he be a symbol, representation, or metaphor for? So Mercutio is neither a Montague nor a Capulet, and instead he is related to Prince Aeschylus and Paris, thus suggesting that he is of high status within Verona. Because he does not belong to either of the feuding families, the young man could mingle with the Montagues and Capulets alike, but his immense loyalty to Romeo suggests that Mercutio affiliates much more strongly with the Montagues. In comparison to his friend Benvolio, you could say that Mercutio is provocative, feisty, and not particularly serious. Now, Mercutio occupies a few different story roles. He is a comic character, as is indicated by his jokes, puns, and sarcasm, as well as the fact that many of his lines are written in prose rather than verse. As I mentioned just moments ago, he contrasts quite a bit with Benvolio, and so you could say that Mercutio is Benvolio's foil, and vice versa. Finally, you could say that Mercutio's death in Act 3 Scene 1 is what sends the play on its tragic trajectory, for up until that point in the play, it is more typically romantic than it is tragic. Given that Mercutio only appears in 4 of the play's scenes, it's a bit tricky to really say what he might be a symbol, representation, or metaphor for, but I think I've got an idea. Mercutio, I would argue, typifies Elizabethan masculinity. This can be seen in how he is immensely loyal to Romeo, given that male friendships were super important in Shakespeare's time and were valued more highly than the relationships between men and women. Furthermore, his occasional violence and frequent sexual humour also present him as typically masculine. Given that this typically masculine character dies halfway through the play, you have to wonder what point Shakespeare was trying to make. Hopefully this has given you a decent idea about who Mercutio is as a character, what his story role might be, and what he could be considered a symbol, representation, or metaphor for. Now then, which quotations could you focus on if you wanted to analyse him? So we're going to begin our analysis of Mercutio by considering his first line in the play. As Mercutio, Benvolio and Romeo approach the Capulet ball, Romeo says he doesn't feel like dancing at the party that night, to which Mercutio retorts, "Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance." Here we get the impression that Mercutio is a supportive friend. His friendship with Romeo is first made evident by how he uses the adjective gentle to refer to Romeo, which implies a sense of tenderness and closeness between the two men. Mercutio's supportiveness is then seen in how he insists that Romeo dances at the Capulet ball. Using our knowledge of the play, we know that Romeo is pretty down in the dumps about Rosaline, and so by insisting that Romeo dances at the party, we can see that Mercutio is trying to distract his friend and have something else occupy his mind. Indeed, dancing at a party can be quite fun and carefree, and so we get the impression that Mercutio really is trying to help his friend enjoy himself and improve his mood. Mercutio's insistence is probably worth talking about for a moment. In his line, he uses the modal verb must, which suggests that Romeo is obligated or is being forced to dance. Mercutio's line doesn't really suggest that Romeo's dancing is something that can be negotiated. As such, although Mercutio is a supportive friend, you could argue that he is somewhat forceful with his supportiveness. Next, let's consider 3 quotations, all of which come from Act 1, Scene 4. Those quotations are: "If love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down." And, "Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairy's midwife." And, "This is the hag, when maids lie on their backs, that presses them and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage." Okay, so each of these quotations demonstrates that Mercutio is a humorous character who tends to specialise in sexual innuendo. In the first quotation, this is evident in the anti-metabole, "If love be rough with you, be rough with love." Anti-metabole is a technique whereby you repeat a phrase but reverse its order, and so in this line it goes love, rough, rough, love. This rhetorical flourish suggests that Mercutio is a somewhat whimsical character. Given that it is the terms love and rough that he is repeating though, we see that his humour is sexual, for although love being rough could be interpreted as being a reference to how Romeo has been rejected romantically, Mercutio's assertion to be rough with love is perhaps a reference to unromantic sexual intercourse. Likewise, the repetition of prick also carries sexual connotations, as does the verb beat, the combined effect of which is that Mercutio's lines really are rather quite dirty. Mercutio's sexual humour is also apparent in the second quotation, which comes right from the start of his famous Queen Mab speech. Given that she is the fairy's midwife, we already get the impression that Mercutio is an unserious character, given that he is randomly talking about fairies as Romeo tries to explain a prophetic dream he has had. However, the sexual connotations of these lines becomes apparent if we consider the name Queen Mab. Queen, Q-U-E-E-N, has a homophone, queen, Q-U-E-A-N, which was a term in Shakespeare's time for a female sex worker. Likewise, a mab was a word for a promiscuous woman in Shakespeare's time, and so as much as the figure of Queen Mab might be a fairy, her name is also a not so subtle sexual pun. The fact that Mercutio mentions Queen Mab in response to Romeo mentioning that he had a dream suggests that Mercutio is trying to gently mock his friend by suggesting that Romeo's dream was sexual in nature. Last, as if to really emphasise how crude his humour is, the third quotation is full of sexual references. The image of maids lying on their backs clearly evokes sexual intercourse, whereas the phrase women of good carriage can be interpreted as referring to women carrying their unborn children during pregnancy, or alternatively it could be read as being yet another indirect reference to sexual intercourse, given the connotation of riding that carriages possess. All in all then, these 3 quotations really do suggest that Mercutio is rather quite filthy. You probably don't need to write about all 3 of them in your exam, but writing about one of these quotations, or 2 if you're looking for the top grades, might be a good idea, given how central Mercutio's sexual humour is to his character. So we're going to remain in Act 1 Scene 4 for one more quotation. Given that Mercutio is pretty prominent in this scene, and given also that he only appears in 4 scenes total in the play, this really is an important scene to mention if you are asked to write about how he is presented. Let's consider 3 lines then, which are: True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy. Here we learn that Mercutio is dismissive of fate, which might present him as a contrarian character. Mercutio's dismissal of fate is seen in how he personifies dreams, here representing fate, given their premonitory characteristic in the play, as being the children of an idle brain, with the dismissive adjective idle, of course, meaning lazy. Mercutio is, in other words, suggesting that dreams are essentially meaningless. This effect is reinforced by the phrase vain fantasy, which sees Mercutio assert that dreams or dreamers are self-interested and somewhat deluded. Given that Romeo is implied to believe in the premonitory quality of dreams, Mercutio's rejection of them presents him as a contrarian character, someone who always says the opposite to somebody else, either to tease them or to get some sort of response out of them. Given the context of this scene, it is possible that Mercutio dismisses fate in order to try to get Romeo to stop being so pensive. They are heading off to a party after all, and all of those deep thoughts aren't quite fitting in with the party atmosphere. As I mentioned in my video about fate, which I do strongly recommend you check out after watching this video, Mercutio's dismissal of it seems particularly ironic, for his death appears to be an inevitable consequence of the Montague-Capulet feud. By giving fate the last laugh, Shakespeare may have been warning his audience against being contrarian, or at least warning them to be careful of the things they say. Alright, let's jump into Act 2 for our next quotation. When Benvolio calls after Romeo, trying to find his friend after he has crept away to go be with Juliet, Mercutio decides to join in, yelling, "Romeo, humours, madman, passion, lover, appear thou in the likeness of a sigh, speak but one rhyme and I am satisfied, cry but a me, pronounce but love and dove." Here we learn that Mercutio is an intentionally abrasive character. This is seen in how he repeatedly mocks Romeo in these lines, something he does to provoke a reaction from his friend and draw him out of hiding. Mercutio's mocking of Romeo is evident throughout these lines. In the top line, he first shouts Romeo's name, then refers to him as humours, madman, passion, lover, each of which suggests that Romeo is driven by his emotions rather than logic, is perhaps made mad by his emotions, and is overwhelmingly passionate and romantic. The phrase likeness of a sigh sees Mercutio mock the woe that Romeo, as a spurned lover, has experienced so far in the play, whereas the final two lines see Mercutio ridicule how Romeo behaves like a Petrarchan lover. When he tells Romeo to cry "a me" and make the cliched rhyme between love and dove, we see that Mercutio is deriding the romantic tendencies that dominate his friend. That is not to say that Mercutio is nasty though. As I said earlier, he is saying these things to provoke a reaction from Romeo so that he can locate his friend. As such, because he knows or thinks he knows which buttons to press, these lines in fact highlight the closeness of Romeo's and Mercutio's friendship. Okay, let's consider two quotations that come from later on in Act 2. Although both of these relate to Tybalt, by considering how Mercutio speaks about other people, we can learn things about him as well. So what are those quotations? They are: "Any man that can write may answer a letter," and "He fights as you sing, prick song, keeps time, distance and proportion. He rests his minim rests, 1, 2, and the third in your bosom, the very butcher of a silk button, a duellist, a gentleman of the very first house of the first and second cause. Ah, the immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hey." Here we get the impression that Mercutio is a sarcastic character who does not take Tybalt particularly seriously. The sarcasm is most apparent in the first quotation, which Mercutio states in response to Benvolio mentioning that Romeo will answer the letter that Tybalt has sent to him, a letter containing a challenge to a duel. So by stating that any man that can write may answer a letter, we see Mercutio respond in a somewhat flippant and sarcastic way. Rather than take Tybalt's request for a duel seriously, Mercutio mocks it and undermines its significance, ignoring the very real threat it contains. Because this sarcasm also has the effect of downplaying the seriousness of Tybalt's intentions, we also get the impression that Mercutio does not think much of Tybalt or take him very seriously, which is of course ironic given how Mercutio, dies later on in the play. The second and much lengthier quotation reinforces the idea that Mercutio does not take Tybalt particularly seriously. By comparing Tybalt's fighting style to singing, Mercutio implies that Tybalt's skills are more artistic than they are deadly. Indeed, by calling Tybalt a butcher of a silk button, Mercutio uses a metaphor to insinuate that Tybalt is so harmless that he is more likely to ruin a piece of clothing than he is to injure the person wearing it. Last, although the italicization of passado, punto reverso and hey may have seen Shakespeare follow the convention of italicizing non-English words, the fact that they are italicized could also indicate that Mercutio is emphasizing these words, an emphasis that is, in my mind, sarcastic. The italicized terms are sword-fighting maneuvers, and so if they are sarcastically stressed, we come to understand that Mercutio is mocking them, perhaps suggesting that he thinks Tybalt's sword-fighting is more learned and rehearsed than it is especially deadly. It's sort of like when you might, wrongly, mock someone for using a big word at school, which is something that people tend to do when they think that someone is showing off, rather than being particularly effective or meaningful. Alright, we have finally made it to Act 3, Scene 1, the final scene in which Mercutio appears, because he dies during it. We are going to consider two quotations from this scene, the first of which is, "Oh calm, dishonourable vile submission! Alistair Cato carries it away. Tybalt, you rat-catcher, will you walk?" Here we get two distinct impressions about Mercutio, the first of which is that he is an aggressive character. This impression is created by various things in this quotation. First, because Mercutio denigrates submission by using a list of 3 negative adjectives, we see that he detests peacefulness, or rather that he prefers violence. Second, because he uses the insult rat-catcher to refer to Tybalt, we get the impression that Mercutio is looking to goad Juliet's cousin into starting a fight. This impression is reinforced by how Mercutio asks Tybalt if he will walk, a question that in this context sees Mercutio ask if Tybalt will fight him or not. Clearly, Mercutio is absolutely itching for a fight. But why is he so desperate to fight? The top line sheds some light on this matter. The triadic sentence, "O calm, dishonourable, vile submission," makes it clear that Mercutio detests peacefulness, but not just anybody's peacefulness. Romeo's in particular. If you rejected a duel in Shakespeare's time, you would be considered unmasculine and a coward, and as such your honour would indeed suffer. Mercutio does not want this for his friend, and so by offering to fight in his place, Mercutio looks to defend Romeo's honour. Because Mercutio does this despite the potentially deadly consequences of violence, this quotation suggests to us that Mercutio is incredibly loyal to Romeo. In this sense, the friendship shared by Romeo and Mercutio exemplifies the strong male friendships that were celebrated during Shakespeare's time. As I have said elsewhere in this video series, friendships between men were valued more highly in society than romantic relationships between men and women were, for male relationships were made out of choice rather than being arranged or viewed as business transactions, and were more mentally and spiritually intimate. Given their importance, defending your friend's honour and ensuring that their reputation was not weakened was something that men would do for each other in Shakespeare's time, and this is precisely what we see here in the play. And last, but by no means least, let's consider this fairly long quotation Mercutio says as he is dying, which is, "No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough, 'twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. A plague on both your houses. Zounds! A dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death! A braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic! Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt, under your arm. Now I'm aware this is quite long, but it's a really rich quotation that could prompt several different analyses, so bear with me. First, we can see that even in death, Mercutio is sarcastic or somewhat humorous. When he states that his wound is not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, he uses hyperbole for comedic effect. For a wound that is as deep as a well and as wide as a church door would be ridiculously enormous. This humour is tempered by how he then immediately states that the wound is enough, for although it is not comedically large, Mercutio states that it has definitely injured him quite seriously. His humour is also apparent in how he states that his friends will find him a grave man if they ask for him tomorrow, for grave has at least two meanings, one of which is serious, and the other is the pit in the ground that dead people are buried in. So when he says that he will be a grave man tomorrow, Tybalt could be suggesting that he will be serious tomorrow, which therefore implies that he is not serious today, or that he will be dead this time tomorrow. The fact that there is potentially some ambiguity here makes this line funny. Mercutio is also presented as arrogant in these lines. This is apparent in the quotation that starts with zounds and ends with arithmetic, for Mercutio's two exclamations refer to Tybalt. In the first exclamation, Mercutio uses the list a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat to metaphorically suggest that Tybalt is subhuman and therefore inferior to him. In the second quotation, the tricolon, a braggart, a rogue, a villain, sees Mercutio list various nouns to paint a negative impression of Tybalt, whereas he once again mocks Tybalt's fighting style by suggesting that it is made by the book of arithmetic. By creating the impression that Tybalt is somehow inferior to him, we see that Mercutio is somewhat arrogant, an effect that is reinforced if you consider that these lines are exclamations, for this reveals that he is shocked that Tybalt could indeed kill him. Even though he has proof that Tybalt is very capable as a fighter, Mercutio still refuses to accept it, thus suggesting that he is arrogant. Last, let's consider the famous line, a plague on both your houses. Here, we learn that Mercutio blames Romeo for his death. This is because the exclamation, a plague on both your houses, is a curse that sees Mercutio attribute blame for his death on both the Montagues and the Capulets, and the pointless feud that the two families are embroiled in. Now, given that Mercutio clearly dislikes Tybalt, him blaming the Capulets for his death is unsurprising. But given that this plague applies to both of the houses, we can see that he has turned his back on the Montagues, the family he has closely affiliated himself with through his close friendship with Romeo and Benvolio. Indeed, Mercutio's blame of Romeo is also apparent in the final two sentences of his speech, because his repetition of second-person pronouns, as seen in you and your, sees him directly point the finger at his close friend, and imply that if Romeo had not interfered, Mercutio would not have been fatally wounded, after all. Blimey, that last quotation got a bit deep, didn't it? Well, you will be relieved to know that now that I have discussed 10 quotations, that is my analysis of Mercutio complete. But don't close the video just yet, because doing so would mean that you would miss out on today's big question, and you wouldn't want that, would you? So then, today's big question is, if Mercutio symbolises Elizabethan ideals of masculinity, to what extent is masculinity shown to be a good thing in Shakespeare's play? Now feel free to do whatever you like with that question. You could use it to form the basis of a mind map or flashcard. You could use it to stimulate discussion or debate with your friends and classmates if you are revising together, or you could even use it to prompt a short evaluative paragraph. And you know where would be an awesome place for that paragraph? That's right, the comments section. It always brightens my day to see the amazing ideas that you lot come up with, and if you're brave enough to share them with me, I'll make sure to give them a read and provide some quick feedback too, so why not give it a go? And if that question's still lingering in your mind, I guess it is time to wrap up this video. Genuinely, I really do hope that you have found this video to be helpful and that you feel a bit more confident when it comes to studying or revising Shakespeare's play as a result of watching it. If this video has indeed helped you out, please do consider giving it a like, writing a comment on it to let me know, sharing it around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and of course subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember that, as always, I hope you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please do take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be.
So how is Mercutio presented in Romeo and Juliet? Well, as much as he appears to be a sarcastic, unserious character who makes sexual jokes left, right and centre, behind all of that there is an intensely loyal friend who ultimately loses his life trying to defend Romeo's honour.